So members of the committee, if you have questions, please hit your request to speak buttons, and we will go on through, and we will begin with Senator Titus.
There was a mention that the average life for this obligation is for 30 years. What's the average life of a baseball stadium? How long do teams stay in one community?
Senator, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Madam Chair, is it appropriate just to respond directly?
You may go straight to the member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The answer to your question is there isn't a specific answer. We have baseball stadiums and teams that have existed for a very, very long time. Obviously, the Oakland A's have had a number of homes beginning in Philadelphia as one of the original American League baseball teams. Obviously, Senator, assets are built to a greater standard today than they were in years past. And so we certainly believe that the term would be 30 years is not unreasonable. In addition to that, there's a non-relocation agreement in this particular case. And so two things to sort of mention. One, the bill as currently drafted requires not only that the facility is built to a first-class premier standard among the best, if not the best, of any Major League Baseball stadium, it also requires that the team commit to maintain that standard throughout the life of the facility. So the hope is that there's sufficient capital allocation that, frankly, the A's will be responsible for, combined with the fact that a non-relocation agreement would ensure that the term of the financing and the term of the commitment are equal.
I want to get this correct. You've all called us in here for a special session and are asking minimally for the state to give you all $36 million per year for the next 5 years for a taxpayer-funded stadium at the same time that the governor has vetoed funding for summer school, a bill to support children's mental health, a bill requiring paid family leave, all because the governor said we couldn't afford them. Can you explain to me why we need to provide hundreds of millions of dollars for a billionaire team to come to the Las Vegas Strip on some of the most valuable property in the world if we can't provide funding for critical resources like summer school and healthcare? And to follow up on that, I guess my specific question is can you explain to me why this is such a good deal that we should agree that no taxes generated on the corner of Las Vegas Boulevard and Tropicana should go to these critical state and local services for the next 30 years?
Senator Steve Hill, we don't really have standing to talk about some of the questions that you asked that are outside of this. The reason that we are asking for this proposal are really those two that I talked about at the beginning. Opportunity for the state to help create thousands of good paying jobs. And we know that the state will have more money to provide for the services that you mentioned if you do the deal than if you don't.
Sorry, if you feel my frustration, it is because I'm incredibly frustrated. When we first heard this bill in the joint money committees, we expressed concerns about the community benefits. And this might be a question for Ms. King, or this might be a question you would be able to answer. After that hearing, lobbyist after lobbyist after lobbyist came and told us and said they heard our concerns, they were working on our concerns, specifically a community benefits agreement advisory board. We are now 10 days removed from that hearing in a second special session that has forced taxpayers to spend another $250,000 a day to keep us here, and yet what is before us today is the same exact bill that we heard 10 days ago. To say I'm extremely disappointed that no work has been done on this bill over the past 10 days is an understatement, and I appreciate Ms. King's list, but can you explain what your statutory commitment is to address these concerns in this legislative body? Because we are literally looking at the same bill that was presented. And I'm assuming I'm not the only legislator in this building that expressed concerns about the lack of commitment in statute to some of these community benefits. And And to say that I'm disappointed that I had a list of like 6 or 10 things that was read to me today that's not included in this new language is a lot. So if you can kind of address some of that lack of incorporation of the feedback that you heard from this legislature.
Senator Nguyen, Steve Hill. The commitment that you've heard today is real. We did mention at our last hearing that we felt like the specifics of that agreement put in legislation would be potentially problematic. It may cause programs to be locked in when the community changes, the needs change. Obviously, the legislation and what is in it is the decision of this body and not ours. So we're
the debt service that has been established through the treasurer, and I don't know if you guys can answer this, but I think, you know, I don't know if you guys have been watching the wonderful period of time that we have been in this building. Special session yesterday, today, and then probably even sine die before, where there were all kinds of conversations about prudent behavior, fiscally prudent behavior, and acting appropriately within the confines of the money that we have. This particular line gives legislative power to the treasurer to basically touch the unreserved fund balance of the general fund of the state if something goes wrong. It stuck out to me, number one, because it's a legislative power that basically this bill would then transfer to another person, such as the treasurer. Do you guys have any thoughts or concerns about this particular power shift in this bill? It's probably not appropriate for you to answer, Mr. Aguero.
Senator Neal, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Again, you're right. I don't have standing to talk about power shifts or something along those lines. That provision is designed, along with a number of other provisions, to ensure that there's sufficient security in the event that something isn't there. It's also among a list of, requesting an appropriation from this body. So I think the structure is worked. We've worked with bond counsel to make sure that something was crafted that would meet all of the requirements. Beyond that, Senator, I don't have any other comment.
Yeah, I figured that. So I guess this would be more commentary. I have a problem with, number one, the legislature being put on the hook for $25 million, and then on top of that, being then put on the hook to allow someone other than the legislature to touch the unreserved general fund balance of this state in order to secure a stadium for someone who I believe can afford to pay for it themselves. And so I'll leave it there, and then I'm sure members in the committee have other questions, but I have other tax questions later.
When did we start talking about potentially hosting this team here in Las Vegas? When was the first time that thought ignited? Do we know? When did that conversation start?
Senator Steve Hill. I would say the conversation started in earnest in early February.
Early February of this year. So in early February of this year is when we first have that idea. And then 10 days ago is when we have an opportunity to see some language and have some type of conversation. And it is my suggestion that I believe, in having had an opportunity just to do some basic research, that at times we've invested a significant amount of time, much longer than several months, in just the conversations about transferring a player. And we're talking about transferring a whole team and utilizing Nevadans' money to do that. And we've been here for about 10 days in trying to see that language. So it's concerning to me that at times we could say that a conversation for one player had more time invested, more vetting than this possibility. So that is a concern. But I want to go to Section 24 of the Community Benefits Program as I started off the conversation. And Ms. King, I know we mentioned a little bit about what we're hoping to do and spoke broadly about that. What I'm curious about is what did those community benefit programs look like in other states? So let's start off with Oakland. Do we have firm numbers? How much money was invested into the community? How many schools did we work with? How many workforce development programs existed? How much did we invest into technology? How did we work with the community, infrastructure, boys and girls? I'm just trying to understand, here's where we're starting off at. Here's everything we did in Oakland. And so that we can get a comparison to from what we've done before, because that's the track record, to the new partnership we're forming with Nevada.
Senator Yolanda King, for the record, I'm going to ask Ms. Aker to come up exactly what they're doing in the community.
Please, thank you.
Catherine Aker with the A's. Yes, so at a high level, some of the work that we have done, so we annually work with 1,600 nonprofit organizations throughout Northern California, and that includes financial donations, so that's everything from grants or gifts, cash gifts to them. We do complimentary tickets, we do in-kind donations, so we average about 1,600 organizations we work with on an annual basis. Our grants right now are about $1.1 to $1.3 million. And all of the money, we have a nonprofit. Our community fund is our our charitable arm, and all of the money that comes in goes out. So all of the expenses to our charitable fund are covered by the A's. So we try to break even. All of the money that comes in, we go out through our programs as well as our gifts. We have approximately 56 Little Leagues that we are working with throughout Northern California right now. That's 21,000 youth participate in our youth baseball and softball programs. That's everything from uniforms to coaching clinics to player clinics, free tickets, coming out to the games, scholarship programs, and things like that. As I mentioned earlier, 800 classrooms participate in our literacy and math programs. This year alone, we did over $1 million pages were read through our literacy programs. We also have a number of our players that participate, so they support our initiatives and volunteer, as well as our player-run initiatives in the community. We have given about $1 million annually to food insecurity, to the food bank as well. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. I apologize, because it's not $1 million annually. It's $1.1 million worth of food to local food banks. We volunteered over the last probably decade about 20,000 hours in the community, and overall about 250,000 youth have participated in our programs.
Thank you for that. And Madam Chair, I apologize that I'm taking up so much time. And I would appreciate, and I think this body would appreciate, and I think Nevadans in general would appreciate, if that's your starting point, if that's what you're doing already, I think that's something we can put into the NRS. Guaranteed 1.1 million in food banks. Guaranteed 1.1 million in grants. Guaranteed 20,000 human hours in this. Guaranteed 15, because that's what you're doing already. And it lays a foundation for a relationship that's going to start where you are now, and it's not forcing your hand to do so much more, but it shows that good faith relationship. And it doesn't tie your hand to the evolving needs of the community, because unfortunately food insecurity is something we're going to have, and we're not saying which food bank. Community service is something we're always going to have to do, and it doesn't say specifically which community organization we have to do it with. I mean, we're putting into the NRS very specific things that we're obligated to do, and we also just had a presentation with all these projections and these very specific numbers of how many jobs we think we're going to create. I think on the other side of it, we can say that publicly, because I think when we talk about the community benefits program, we speak about it and we tippy-toe and we're so cautious. And you have in this room individuals who went through a negotiation on Allegiant Stadium. We did it through a special session. But I'll tell you, there was one year of humans having conversations individually with legislators at coffee shops. It was 1 year of individuals having conversations individually or in groups with different folk, different perspectives. And even with that 1 year, I'll tell you, the community benefits program that was promised was not delivered. So we are incredibly hesitant, not because of who the partners you are or because of what you're presenting. It has nothing to do with you. It's just that you have folk that were in this room and were promised a lot of things. And the community benefits program sounded great, but very little of it was actually delivered. So when you hear from us pushing back and saying we would love to see some of this in the NRS, it's not because we're suggesting that we don't trust the good faith efforts and we don't trust that we're going to have a great partnership. And that unfortunately some of us are just remembering what just happened a few years ago.
I've been here for 6 years. I don't sit on the money committee, so I am coming to this with a little bit different perspective, and I know that my constituents are concerned about the financial impact and the financial structure of this deal, and I think it is very difficult to understand for the average person. I am struggling to understand it, so I was hoping that you could look at Section 7 with me of the bill, and I'll read it out loud for everybody's benefit. It defines bonds, means one or more series of general obligation bonds additionally secured by pledged revenues authorized to be issued by the county pursuant to subsection 2 of section 34 of this act and the local government securities law, and any general obligation bonds additionally secured by pledged revenues issued to refund all or a portion of such bonds issued pursuant to section 2 of section 34 of this act and the local government securities law. Can you explain that to us in terms that regular people understand?
Senator Scheibel, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I'll try to. The state of Nevada, and it's both its state and local governments, issues bonds all the time. It essentially takes a revenue stream that we have today and essentially utilizes that revenue stream to bring dollars forward in order to be able to build a building or build a school. I guess a school is a building, or do other things that we might require for debt. Not unlike when my family purchased a home, for example. You have revenues that are set aside to pay for the principal and interest, and then you have other revenues that are generated. Essentially, those revenues that are set aside to pay that principal and interest go to repay bonds that are issued. In this particular case, those bonds are estimated to be about $120 million. So that is this debt that's going to be created, issued by Clark County. We then have revenues that are generated by the project. Those are like the income we just talked about that are going to be dedicated and set aside into an account that will be utilized to make payments on those bonds over time. There are specific requirements in the definition that you just read. You've got the idea of a bond. That's that debt instrument that goes out. There's also other terminology that's included in there, this idea of being able to refund a bond, for example. Imagine for that if, much like my home, if the interest rate goes down, sometimes I want to refinance that debt, right? I can't take on more debt, but what I can do is to get the advantage of a lower interest rate, for example. That simply preserves the opportunity for the county to come in and say, hey, look, interest rates have dropped. Let's reduce the amount of interest that we're paying and continue to pay the project over the same term of the debt that would exist. You also see that there are specific laws that are included, that are referenced there. There are laws that draw the foundation in terms of what the state can do and local governments can do in terms of the issuance of that debt. We have to follow those. You will also find in the document that there are some provisions that you're excluding it from, right? Things like the total amount of debt that's taken out by a local government. This doesn't count against it because it's considered a special obligation for purposes of that. It does sound complicated, and oftentimes laws do that, at least for me. They have a tendency to feel somewhat complicated, but it is debt that is essentially secured by revenues, and those bonds are ultimately issued by Clark County, and with all of the reserves and the coverage that we've talked about throughout the presentation.
Why are they leaving Oakland? Okay, there's been a strong relationship there for decades. Now, the whole area is apparently going downhill. Mr. Fisher has been criticized for not putting enough dollars back into the stadium or his own team, and now he's going to relocate, and basically the commitment that they had to the community that undoubtedly at one time was strong is going away, and one of the selling points you're presenting to us today is that the Oakland A's are going to come here and be the Las Vegas A's and have a strong commitment to the community. But I have this sensation that they're abandoning a community that they undoubtedly made very similar commitments to in the past. Now, obviously, I apologize because you can't answer those questions because you're only dealing with the the Nevada side of it. But from my perspective as a legislator, I want to see, because if this happens, this is a 30-year tax arrangement and thing. That means somebody, I'll be dead in 30 years more than likely. So, but I want to make sure that the decisions we make today, which will commit us to these tax abatement programs and so forth, are going to be honored down the road. And I'm looking at the track record of the Oakland A's and Mr. Fisher.
Senator Hansen, Steve Hill. Just to be clear, the A's have been in Oakland since the late 60s. They've had over 50-year run in that city. And obviously the stadium issues that they have had, the Raiders have had, have caused them to look elsewhere and choose Las Vegas. The way this legislation is written, if they leave inside of that 30-year commitment, they have to pay off all the outstanding bonds in order to do so. If they leave, we will have a baseball stadium that in the majority, the A's have paid for it, and they will have paid off all the bonds that are outstanding.
Many of us have shared our frustration that we just finished a session and now we're back here to consider a tax giveaway for a multi-billionaire without concessions made from the athletics in terms of the ramifications that might occur from such consideration of a proposal. As you may know, the stadium that is proposed and other sites that you have considered is in my district, and I have heard from residents that there is no direct response right now as to how to address the workers that will be displaced from those who are at the Tropicana and the traffic safety concerns that will be further worsened because of this current proposal. And I understand that you documented that, but it still does not show enough progress, at least from my concern. And I don't know if any of you have ever had the chance to drive on Frank Sinatra Drive on a Friday night at 6 p.m., but I sure have, because it's my route to home and it's not fun. And it's saddening that we have this proposal, and we had proposals during the session. For instance, I carried a proposal that was going to provide coverage for kids who are undocumented for their cancer treatment. We couldn't even get that done, but now we have a tax giveaway, millions of dollars, and so it's kind of frustrating, at least from my side. Having said that, I do have a few questions that perhaps you guys could answer because I think it's important. And my last question is actually for the leadership of the athletics because I want to hear from them directly. So if the president is here, I would prefer for him to start walking down because I think it's important for the taxpayers to have that question answered. So my first two questions. With regard to the bill proposal, in reviewing Section 20 of the bill, it states that the Board of County Commissioners shall create a resort corridor homeless prevention and assistance fund. Could you help provide background as to why this proposal was accepted? To me, limiting it just to the resort corridor sounds like you're just finding a way to bus homeless folks from the tourist areas and instead ignoring the true root of the problem. And, for me, I personally believe that because my district encompasses the Las Vegas Strip and surrounding areas, I would request that the language adds downtown Las Vegas and surrounding neighborhoods to the section of the bill because we know that this problem extends beyond the Strip corridor. There are neighborhoods, for instance, down the street from my house near Las Vegas Boulevard and Oakey that could have support services enacted in them. And so I just want to hear your background as to why this was included specifically for the resort corridor.
Senator Donate, Jeremy Aguero. The brief answer to your question, it was originally created because there was a desire to make sure that if the project overperformed, that the community would benefit. I think there was a recognition, a request by Clark County to create such a fund that would capture any of that overperformance by the project, and this is what was here. Perhaps in the drafting, I wasn't very elegant in terms of its design. The idea didn't mean that we're only going to have the money be dedicated to the resort corridor. It simply meant that the dollars were collected in the resort corridor. So to the extent that a clarification relative to that would be helpful to make sure that its intent is clear, I'm more than happy to entertain any revision that would homelessness is not a localized problem. The revenue generated will be localized to that.
I don't know if the leadership of the Oakland A's. Thank you for being here.
Senator, yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much. Dave Cavill, President of the A's. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. If you could restate the question, it'd be great.
Sure. So this is my final question. It's directly to you. So on page 39 of your presentation, you listed the tax revenue sources, and there's several tax revenue sources that will be included in the Sports and Entertainment and Improvement District. In one of them, you've listed the live entertainment tax, and that's something that is going to be captured. And so this question is directly to you as the leadership of the Oakland Athletics and your future presence. In the legislation before us, I find it a coincidence that there are funding considerations that will take certain tax percentages away from our county, and that's a problem. Having said that, I believe there's an equity issue that exists in our state, and I want to make sure that I get this from you directly. Given the gaps that we have seen in conversations we've had throughout this session, it is clear that not everyone pays for the live entertainment tax. For example, in my district, which is also where the stadium is going to be located, we have venues like Sand Dollar. It's a local bar that features live bands, and they pay the live entertainment tax. But considerations like yours, athletic stadiums or events, would not have to pay for it. So I want to get this just off on the record directly to you. Would you agree that it is important to maintain equity across all businesses and that you will commit to willingly pay for the live entertainment tax for baseball games and athletic events featured at this facility in the near future?
Well, I appreciate the question. Obviously, we're bringing the baseball team to Southern Nevada, over $1 billion in private capital. We're looking for a partnership, and we want to make sure that we're going to continue to invest in a variety of ways to improve this situation for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, in a variety of fashions beyond the live entertainment tax. So I think by bringing additional tourists and other ways that generate tax dollars for the community, we think our project can actually be a net positive for the community, plus the quality of life that comes with a baseball team.
Thank you so much for that. But that didn't answer my question. So again, it's a yes or no. Will you willingly commit to pay the live entertainment tax in the near future to fix the equity issue that exists?
Like I said, we are committed to being a great community partner in Southern Nevada and investing, over $1 billion to ensure
That still does not answer the question, sir. I'm asking you directly, yes or no. Will you commit to paying the equity issue that we see existence for the live entertainment tax?
The legislation as it's currently envisioned, does not contemplate that. The project is based on, what is currently proposed. And so we've been focusing on that as really the path forward for the team and for the community.
Thank you. I find that disingenuous. I asked you directly, you're going to be capturing this as part of your legislation, yet you can't even commit to doing it yourself. And so I think that's something that the taxpayers must know of this state, but I divert my questions for the next round. Thank you.
If we have a mega resort that's going to be built, not a matter of if, but when, and I would imagine it's going to happen soon, I would say before 2030, what is the approximate, just give me a range of low to high, of what the Wynn, Bellagio, and Venetian as an average contributes to the general fund of the state of Nevada every year? I guess.
Senator Stone, Jeremy Aguero, I don't know that I can give you those specific numbers, but I can tell you that from the analysis that if we look at visitor-related activities and our resort industry generally, it's about 43% of general fund revenues are either directly or indirectly related to our tourism-based economy.
So is it fair to say that if this becomes a mega resort, it's going to add a significant sum of money to the coffers, which you have not contemplated as a part of your economics? Is that correct?
Senator, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, that's correct, sir.
Okay. And then I want to talk about naming rights. Who is going to be the beneficiary of the income from the naming rights? Will that be income that is going to be going to pay off the bonds, et cetera, or is that going to be going to the owner of the team?
Senator Stone, Steve Hill, that would be revenue that would be
That would be for the A's, okay? And I also want you to talk about bringing a Major League Baseball team to any city. It's my understanding that if we want a team, whether it's the A's or another team, if we have to build a stadium, that it is a Major League Baseball policy that there has to be a public-private partnership. Is that correct?
Senator Stone, Steve Hill, I don't know if that is stated policy of Major League Baseball. At the proposal that we have presented.
Okay.
I'm willing to assume that at one day, it may be we reach 27,000 visitors. My question is, do we have enough time to reach it in order to make up the average of 27,000 visitors, right? Because if we lag in years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we only have an extra 2,500 seats to be able to make up in perpetuity, right? I mean, depending on how quickly we get there, we never may be able to average 27,500 unless we start in years 1 and 2 pretty close to that number.
Senator Harris, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, you're right. You're 100% right. The other part of it is those first years are probably going to be the years that it's easiest to fill that stadium. It's going to be the shiny new project on the Las Vegas Strip. The ability to sell that place out over those first 3 years, yeah, I like our chances relative to that.
Okay. I'll just throw out one more scenario, and then I have a question about traffic, Chair, if that's okay. So even if we assume that attendance is on average doubled over the first 3 years, that's 18,000 average for 3 years, so 54,000 people. 27,000 times 3 is 81,000. So 81,000 minus 54,000 means we'd have to make up 27,000 more visitors. 27,000 visitors over 3 years is another 9,000 people over the next 3 years. So you'd have to then do 27,000 in the 3 years after that, plus 9,000, 36,000 people, which is beyond the capacity, in order to have an average in the first 6 years.
Senator Harris, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, again, you're starting the math that you're presenting with the estimate that they would be operating in the bottom quartile of Major League Baseball teams. If that's the premise, you're absolutely correct. The analysis that's being done suggests that they will go from where they are today, which for the record is dead last, right, to something that's in the 50th percentile by building an asset, by coming to a different location and giving the team a fighting chance at success.
And I think that's fair, but I also think it's fair for me and fairly generous for me to be assuming that they're going to double their attendance in the first 3 years. But that's I guess, a difference in assumptions. But I felt that that was a fairly generous assumption, and even with that, we've got quite a bit of work to do. In this report that I have here prepared by, it looks like, Kimley Horn, there are several recommended infrastructure improvements, including realigning Reno Avenue curved intersection as a major four-way signaled intersection, widening Reno Avenue to provide eastbound and northbound dual left turn lanes, widening Reno Avenue to provide westbound and southbound dual left turn lanes, modifying the median along Las Vegas Boulevard to lengthen southbound to eastbound dual left turn lanes at Reno, installing northbound right turn lanes and a new project access driveway along Las Vegas Boulevard, and approximately 5 or 6 other things that are being suggested to be done to handle the traffic. Has the A's committed to engaging in any of these infrastructure projects?
Senator Harris, Steve Hill. This relates to the high-impact project process that the county goes through. That has to be completed to the county's satisfaction prior to this project moving forward. So that conversation will happen during that period of time.
Okay, I'll try one more time. So has the A's committed to doing what is necessary when it comes to infrastructure, maybe even the recommendations based upon the study that they commissioned, in order to ensure that the traffic is taken care of ahead of this stadium opening?
Senator Harris and Dave, I'm wrong here, but they have committed to do what it takes to meet that high-impact project plan that will be put in place by the county. The County Public Works needs to weigh in on Kimley Horn's study in that conversation, but they have committed to do what they need to do.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Heard that correctly. So we're expecting like a 3 times return on investment for this. We have the experience of the Allegiant Stadium where we have almost twice the visitation, the incremental visitation that as we expected. And when you think about Las Vegas, in my mind, when I think about the Raiders, the Knights, now we've got F1, I think this is another piece that makes it sort of the ultimate professional team, sports destination. And so, since you're the head of the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, do you think there's a draw for just that? And the last thing I'll say is, when I think about baseball versus a lot of other sports, it's affordable. Families get to go. When you think about the local families or like a school, they can go to events like this. So it's this big destination that, and Las Vegas is really an international destination. If you ever say you're from Nevada, they always say Las Vegas. They don't say Reno. They say Las Vegas. That sometimes people know Tahoe, but like the driver of it really increasing in a very positive way, the visibility and the attraction of Las Vegas, and then in a local way, families can go to these games. They can afford these games. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that. Thank you.
Senator Gansert, Steve Hill. There are a number of benefits that are harder to quantify that are not in these numbers. The reputation of Las Vegas as, a city who can figure out how to say yes, who can make these things happen, that matters. The message that it sends when these professional sports leagues choose our city. It highlights the city. We get better marketing from having these events, these teams, than we could ever possibly afford to buy. That value is not in the numbers either. And the momentum that we have in becoming the sports and entertainment capital of the world, this is another huge step, more energy in creating that image, that environment, that reality. And we are separating ourselves from other cities so that this can become more permanent, more stable, and we think that's important as well.
Just to answer too, that like family, like affordability, the average ticket versus maybe some of the other sporting events we have, if you don't mind just commenting on that. Thank you.
Senator Gansert, Steve Hill. Certainly, and we will have 81 baseball games a year, plus playoff games. That allows approximately 2.5 million, maybe a little more seats per year to be available. Seats at this stadium, there will be seats available in the stadium in the $15 range, which is just not possible for others. I mean, it's the comparison's just different. There are fewer seats, or there are many fewer games in other leagues, and so it makes it a family event that's very affordable.
Regarding the peripheral work, the road work, and various things that need to do to accommodate, and there's a principle in development called concurrence. So if you're having a project that then has impacts, they have to mitigate those impacts in concurrence with the project opening. And you indicated that they were committed to do whatever it is they're going to do. So my question is, partly, is the county paying for that? The city? Is the owners of the A's going to put in part of the cost for some of those projects and various things? Is that going to be covered by some of the things in this agreement, either the project agreement or the community, the local business purposes, et cetera, small local businesses? Is all that going to be covered, or is that separate and just goes from there? And I would hope that at least those parts of the public projects would not be excluded from the bidding provisions that you have here. I'm just curious how that all meshes together.
Senator Daley, Steve Hill. I would imagine, I know any public work project is going to go through the entire process. That's not addressed or changed by this bill. The conversation will happen between the A's and Clark County, and you're right, they will be required to mitigate all of the concerns or impacts, really, that the stadium causes in that area. The county has agreed to a $25 million credit on the cost of that mitigation. But that cost is not reflected in the $1.5 billion number, and will, other than that $25 million, be borne by the A's.
I noticed that there is a one-time construction fiscal impact of, I think, 38.8 million based on the estimated sales tax. So how, both of these revenue sources will be pledged to paying off the county bonds, but will the state and local governments, and specifically school districts, see any tax revenue associated with the stadium construction, or will it all be pledged to bond replacement?
Senator Dondero Loop, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. During the construction, all of those dollars would be utilized for the creation of the repayment of the bonds and the creation of the reserves that we talked about before. Because there's no operations that are occurring, there would be no other revenue that would inure to state, local governments, or school districts.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to understand. This isn't, necessarily always my wheelhouse.
Some of my colleagues have asked about the traffic situation and the challenges that intersection has with the I-15, the construction, and when big events happen. Has Nevada Department of Transportation been consulted about, what additional traffic challenges and problems need to be solved if this bill passes and if we start construction on that stadium? Because I know that in the conversation on the Allegiant Stadium, it seemed like they were here and there was a lot of conversation about what the plans they had and being able to handle the traffic going to the football stadium. And I just wonder if they're part of this.
Senator Orenshall, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I remember those conversations, right? There was a lot. We talked a lot about parking and transportation and all those things. But let's recall that when we talked about Allegiant Stadium here, they didn't have a site, right? We didn't know where they were going to be located when that took place. So a lot of those were sort of in the context of building something as large as a 60,000 seat stadium, 65,000 seat stadium. The context of those conversations are exactly why the legislation that's presented to you today is structured the way that it is. It actually requires that the developer of the stadium go to Clark County and enter into a high-impact project agreement that contemplates transportation, utilities, air traffic, all of those things, because they're not settled today. We don't have all of those answers. More directly to the question that you're asking, the Nevada Department of Transportation is also reflected in the bill as drafted and requires that if there are infrastructure requirements that NDOT identifies as being something that needs to be mitigated, that the A's, the developer in this case, have an affirmative obligation to work not only with the local government, but also work with NDOT to mitigate those infrastructure impacts on the community.
So the projections for construction jobs at Allegiant Stadium were 11,000. And I remember us talking about shiny new objects, I think it was with Faraday. But the project only produced 900 construction jobs in each year of construction, so 2,700 jobs.
Senator Spearman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Again, we're talking about person years of employment, and we're talking about direct, indirect, and induced employment overall. And I would suggest that if you look at the number of individuals that were employed in terms of Allegiant Stadium, I think there were a substantial. If you look at the number of suppliers that supported that project that may not have been part of their direct payroll, they were substantial. If you look at the amount of wages and salaries that were paid on that project and the average hourly wage that was paid on that project and what the ripple effects were associated with that, it was substantial. I know that there's been questions relative to the total number of employees and those type of things. Again, it's very difficult to measure those indirect and those induced impacts because there's no way for me to understand how many doctors or folks that are working at restaurants or grocery stores that have a job as a result of someone's secondary spending as a result of they got a paycheck. The way that the construction estimates are generated is based on the total amount of payroll that is associated with the project and what our average wage is in the community. And I would suggest both of those support both Allegiant Stadium and this project will have a very significant impact on our construction workforce.
Thank you for that. And my questions are hypothetical because what we're dealing with here is hypothetical. The third one is on the 2022 LVCVA visitor profile, it shows that people said they visited Las Vegas for sporting events at about 3%. And let me pull that up because there were other things, I think it's like 44% for visiting relatives and friends, 12%, gambling, 6%, social event, 6%, corporate meetings 5%, sporting events 3%, passing through 3%, other business 3%. And so to the point that my colleague from Senate District 11 was making, if this was just last year on LVCVA's profile, 3% of the people said they visited, most of the people, 3% of them said they visited to attend a sporting event. Now please understand, as we're flushing this out, because the people that we represent don't expect us to come here and rubber stamp. And so we have to have answers to this, because right now the only thing we're talking about are what ifs, or assumptions. Granted, there may be some type of actuarial table that was constructed to get to this, but we're talking about the reality now. So please talk to me about how we get to stadium attendance 2.6 million, average annual using per event estimates. And again, estimates, unless it changed in the last couple of days, estimates is another way of saying assumptions.
Senator Spearman, Steve Hill. The number that I think you're referring to is the number of incremental visitors that are in attendance at events. So they're saying that's the reason they came to Las Vegas, and there's a variety of potential reasons that they could reply to there. So that's simply reflective of the 405,000 person number, visitor number that Mr. Aguero has cited, not the 2.6 million total potential seats that are available for all the events at the stadium.
Reading from a letter that Representative Barbara Lee posted today, I write regarding the future of the Oakland Athletics Baseball Club in the East Bay. Many of my constituents in the East Bay and I are increasingly frustrated with the coming apparent failure of the team and Major League Baseball to deal in good faith. Let me jump down to the third paragraph, because I think someone asked this. I believe strongly that our community also provides value to the A's. Oakland has been the site for this franchise for a great deal of time. And then she goes on to say about some things that they had already started doing in preparation, some things that the Oakland A's asked for, and they were in the process of doing that. But now the frustration is coming because they're seeking a new location. So that's part one. But the other one would be, we've heard from someone about the community benefit, but as I look at this, I think the players are very close to the bottom of the pay scale. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I looked at it wrong, but that would be it. And when we talked about, and I can't remember who it was, asked, what is the investment? And right now, if you're asking us to give this much money, there has to be some awareness on the part of the owner and any other interested financial partners who have that fiduciary responsibility. There has to be some awareness of what the commitment, the dollar amount commitment is. Because absent that, the only thing we continue to talk about are just hyperboles. And so, as my colleague to my right said, we hope not to go to another pandemic. But the what ifs. And if we can't, if those payments can't be met and they fall back on the county, if that happens, then we're left, with the shrugging of the shoulders. Well, I don't know what happened. And so my questions, and I believe that the questions of my colleagues are really designed to say, we have to do our due diligence, because this is a lot of money. And the community benefits really don't make up for the lack of money for youth mental health. Now, we passed a lottery that's going to come back again next year, but it's going to be like 6 years before that actually takes place. The now, the here and the now. We don't have the money to increase access, not just access, affordable access, but quality access in our healthcare delivery system. We don't have the money right now to put towards eliminating or at least mitigating homelessness. I have a bill that was about women veterans being housed and women who are coming out of domestic violence situations, formerly incarcerated women, and women who are 50 plus, housing insecure. We don't have money for any of that. And we just closed out the session, so it's going to be another 18 months unless we get called back for a third session, special session. So it's going to be that long. And so my concern, and I will tell you with all honesty, my concern and my hesitation is based upon the lack of certainty. Because those things that we could not do because we don't have the money, but we come 2 days after special session ends, this session ends with a special session, but now we have the money, but we didn't have the money for mental health. We didn't have the money for hospitals. We didn't have the money for homeless to really address homelessness. And $5 million to me is a lot of money, but that's just because I've never had $5 million. But when in the grand scheme of things, and you look at how homelessness has become more and more pervasive, and part of that is because affordable housing does not exist. $5 million towards that problem, towards that challenge, is probably like saying, can you buy me a Coke? And so we would really have to look at it through the lens of how pervasive is the problem, and if we're going to be a good community partner, how do we come up from $5 million so that it really, really, really addresses the problem? Because if we don't do these tax credits, that means that there's going to be money that we can do some other things with. And as far as the transferable tax credits, that for me, if we give that to you, but then you can transfer, you can sell it to someone else. Here we go again, because now you're talking about tax dollars that are here and now, but they're not going to be, and in the future sometime, maybe they will be again. Does that make sense to you? So I'm just trying to, these are questions from people who text me, but they're also questions that I've been trying to figure out in my head. And so I will tell you the transferable tax credits are a problem for me.
I come from the trade show industry, Mr. Hill, as I know you do too, at the LVCVA, and we look at a CES, which brings in 115,000 attendees on average. ConAg, ConExpo just left in March, I think nearly 140,000. So I guess one of my questions would be, will the LVCVA be actively pursuing the convention and trade show sector to fill those seats at A's games?
Senator Pazina, Steve Hill. The answer to that is absolutely yes, and it's not simply the trade show industry and the corporate meeting industry, but our sports department will also be working with the stadium to fill the stadium.
And what percentage of seats, and I'm just curious, in estimation would be filled by visitors versus locals?
Senator Pazina, Steve Hill. The general projection is that about 30%, maybe a little less than 30% of the attendees would be visitors, and then just that 16% of the attendees would be those incremental visitors, and that's the basis for the entire calculation about the benefit to state and local government, just those 16%. And excuse me, but just to put that in a little more perspective, if I could, the 405,000 people, just for 81 baseball games, is just 5,000 people per game that have come to Las Vegas to attend just the baseball game portion of what's been projected. Those are the people who are going to provide 100% of the statewide and fiscal benefit that Mr. Guerra has projected.
This does sound like an exciting opportunity for Nevada. And I did have the opportunity to meet and talk with the A's owner, Mr. Fisher. He seems like a fine man and a person of high integrity. And the jobs, 14,639 jobs for construction of the stadium, and then 8,010 jobs for annual operations of the stadium. And then the visitors that will come to Nevada to watch baseball games, from every state, because they're going to play every team from every state. And the fact that it's affordable, the families, that was a question I asked him, because some of the sports in Nevada are not affordable to a family of 4. And he assured me there would be stadium seats and that a family of 4 could afford to go to these baseball games and buy their kids a hot dog and a soda, maybe some popcorn. And so those things are all very attractive to the state. But just in the last few days, I have received numerous emails from the people that live in Nevada, the people that live in my district. And so my question is there any possibility that the people could possibly receive an increase in their property taxes? Homeowners could receive an increase in their taxes on their property, or Nevada citizens generally could receive a tax increase? Thank you.
Senator Krasner, Steve Hill, Mr. Aguero can correct me if I'm wrong, but no, I don't believe that that would be the case at all.
Under any scenario, that would not be the case?
Senator Krasner, if as Mr. Aguero described, the Armageddon scenario that talked about where the county would actually have to backstop the bonds, there's, by the way, the payments on that $95 million, $120 million bond is about a 15th of that. So it's $9 million when we start, something along those lines, a year. So it might have some minor impact somewhere, but other than that, I don't think so.
I too just want to thank you for being here and presenting. I know it is late. Thanks everyone for staying with us. But I think it's important for us to be able to ask questions. And I think that you've obviously heard that there are some concerns and some things that I think we can have some further discussion about. And so, like my colleague, just looking forward to seeing some amendments and working through some of the pieces of this.